Arnold Franz Walter Schoenberg was born on September 13, 1874 in the Leopoldstadt district of Vienna, Austria. His father Samuel was a shoe shopkeeper originally from Szechenyi, Hungary, while his mother Pauline was a piano teacher from Prague. He also had 3 siblings. Arnold began learning the violin at age 9 and also began composing. He attended the Ferencváros Secondary School in Vienna, where he mostly wrote marches and polkas. Arnold's father died in 1889, causing him to have to provide for his family. He left school and began an apprenticeship for a bank, only being able to pursue music as an onlooker at concerts. While Arnold was largely self-taught as a composer, he would attribute his artistic development to Oscar Adler, David Joseph Bach, and most of all, Alexander von Zemlinsky, whom Arnold had met in 1895 after joining an amateur orchestra. Arnold began studying under Zemlinsky, who helped him break through the Viennese musical scene, although Schoenberg claimed to have learned composition by studying the works of many of the German and Austrian masters. He resigned from his bank position and began taking many conducting positions around Vienna. In 1898, Schoenberg converted to Lutheranism, which musicologist Malcolm MacDonald argued was done to strengthen his attachment to the cultural traditions of Western Europe, and as, quote, self-defense in a time of resurgent anti-Semitism. The following year, Schoenberg wrote a string sextet, Verklärte Nacht. Other pieces written around this time include his first string quartet and his first chamber symphony. In 1901, Schoenberg married Zemlinsky's daughter Matilda. The couple had 2 children named Gertrude and Georg. He then took over the musical direction of the Oberbrettl Cabaret in Berlin. German composer Richard Strauss tried to get Schoenberg a position at Stern Conservatory after talks with its director Gustav Hollander. He most likely taught there until 1903. Schoenberg soon returned to Vienna and became a protege of fellow Austrian composer Gustav Mahler. Schoenberg originally despised Mahler's music, but changed his mind after hearing his 3rd symphony. Mahler, in return, supported Schoenberg even after he could no longer understand his style. Schoenberg then co-founded the Society of Creating Musicians in 1904. 2 of his students, Anton Webern and Albert Berg, would become lifelong friends. It was around this time when Schoenberg's wife had an affair with an Austrian painter, not that one, who had made several portraits of Schoenberg and his family. After she returned, Gershel committed suicide. This event caused a notable shift in Schoenberg's style, reminiscent in his 2nd string quartet written in 1908. This quartet was quite revolutionary for its time, as the last 2 movements were far less tonal than the first 2 and included a soprano. In addition to music, Schoenberg wrote multiple books on music theory, many of which remain incredibly influential. The first of these books was his Harmonie Lehre, written in 1910. After his application for a composition professorship at an academy in Vienna was rejected, he moved back to Berlin. Schoenberg would write Pierrot Lunaire in 1912, an atonal and expressionist song cycle set to the text of Albert Giraud. This piece utilized the technique of Sprechstimme, or speak singing, first used in Engelbert Humperdinck's Königskinder. The ensemble used in the piece is now known as the Pierrot Ensemble, and still has pieces being written for it today. Schoenberg, along with composer Franz Schrecker, was offered a teaching position at the Vienna Conservatory by its director Wilhelm Bopp. Schoenberg seriously considered the offer, but ultimately declined. He told Berg it was due to his, quote, aversion to Vienna, and that while it may not have been the smartest financial decision, he felt content with it. In 1913, an infamous concert at the Wiener Musikverein was conducted by Schoenberg. The audience in attendance was shocked by the expressionist and experimental music on the program, and eventually began to riot. One of the organizers of the concert allegedly slapped an attendant in the face, leading to a lawsuit. Composer Oscar Strauss, an alleged witness, would call the slap, quote, the most harmonious sound of the evening. The audience went so far as to call for Berg to be thrown into an insane asylum for his music. This event, commonly referred to today as the Scandal Concert, may have inspired the more well-known riot at the premiere of Igor Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. The outbreak of World War I brought a crisis to Schoenberg's development, causing him to leave many of his works unfinished. He began training as a reserve officer in 1915, initially sharing the nationalism of his compatriots. One story goes that a superior officer demanded to know if he was, quote, this notorious Schoenberg. Schoenberg replied, quote, beg to report, sir, yes. Nobody wanted to be, someone had to be, so I let it be me. British music journalist Norman Lebrecht claims this quote is a reference to his, quote, destiny as the emancipator of dissonance. Schoenberg would denounce the emerging style of neoclassicism, as well as the music of Stravinsky, Ravel, and Georges Bizet. He would say of this, quote, now comes the reckoning. Now we will throw these mediocre kitschmongers into slavery, and teach them to venerate the German spirit and to worship the German God. In 1918, Schoenberg founded the Society for Private Musical Performances, seeking to provide a forum where modern works could be properly rehearsed and performed. Interestingly, He wouldn't allow his own works to be performed for the Society for the first 2 years of its existence. Members of the Society included Max Reger, Alexander Scriabin, and Erich Wolfgang Korngold. The Society eventually led to the creation of the International Society for Contemporary Music in 1922. Schoenberg began developing his influential method of the 12-tone technique, a form of serialism where all 12 pitches are used equally throughout a piece of music. The technique was adopted by his students, including Webern, Berg, and Hans Eisler, which led to the creation of the Second Viennese School. Despite this massive shift in style, Schoenberg would not denounce his older works, instead viewing this development as natural. In addition, he published more books on music theory, many of which are still in print. Austrian composer Ernst Krenek would criticize certain contemporary music, which some argue was about Schoenberg and his students, calling it, quote, the self-gratification of an individual who sits in a studio and invents rules according to which he then writes down his notes. While it's not confirmed whether this actually was about the Second Viennese School, Schoenberg would still take offense to Krenek's comments, saying Krenek, quote, wishes for only whores as listeners. Jeez, bro hurt me saying that. After his wife's death in 1923, Schoenberg married librettist Gertrude Kolisch, who wrote the libretto for his opera Von Heute auf Morgen. The couple would have 3 children. Schoenberg was then appointed as the director of a masterclass in composition at the Prussian Academy of Arts in 1924, following the death of Ferruccio Busoni. However, he wouldn't officially take his position until 1926 due to his health. Some of his students at the Academy included Josef Rufer and Nikos Skalkatis. Schoenberg would hold his position at the Academy until 1933, when it was revoked by the While in exile in Paris, he was warned of the danger he would face upon returning to Germany. After a long meditation, Schoenberg finally returned to Judaism, with American publisher Marquis Who's Who saying he had realized, quote, his racial and religious heritage were not inescapable. Naturally, Schoenberg would become strongly opposed to and wrote this in a letter to Webern. He would emigrate to the US with his family in the mid-1930s, though he briefly considered moving to England and the Soviet Union. Schoenberg would briefly teach at the Malkin Conservatory at Boston University before moving to Los Angeles and teaching at both USC and UCLA. The latter university would eventually name a music building after him. Schoenberg was then appointed as conductor of the Los Angeles Philharmonic and officially promoted to professor at UCLA in 1936. Some of his students here included Leonard Rosenman, George Tremblay, and Edward B. Powell. Schoenberg would buy a house in Brentwood Park and become friends and tennis partners with American composer George Gershwin. He would even hold gatherings every Sunday, with some notable guests including Otto Klemperer and Edgar Varese. Despite this, Schoenberg at first wasn't entirely settled in the US. He applied for a position at the New South Wales State Conservatorium of Music in Australia, although his application wasn't discovered until the 1970s. On said application were the words modernist ideas and dangerous tendencies written on it by composer Edgar Bainton. Schoenberg would also consider moving to New Zealand, which he had been fascinated with since childhood, but soon abandoned the idea. He then became an American citizen in 1941. In 1947, German novelist Thomas Mann would publish Dr. Faustus. The novel's main character, Adrian Leverkühn, is a composer who writes dodecaphonic music similar to Schoenberg. A controversy would emerge as Mann would attribute the creation of dodecaphonic music to his character, Leverkühn. Schoenberg was naturally unhappy about this, beginning a series of letters with the novel's author. Mann would say that Schoenberg's claims were unfounded and based on a lack of understanding of the text, but would add a postscript to all subsequent editions of his novel, explicitly referring to Schoenberg as the creator of the technique used by his novel's character. Schoenberg would then become the first composer in residence at the Music Academy of the West in Montecito, California. He would also write several notable works, including 2 concerti for violin and piano, Kol Nidre, and A Survivor from Warsaw, which was dedicated to the victims of the In addition, his opera Moses und Aaron, one of the first entirely dodecaphonic pieces, was left unfinished. Some notable composers taught by Schoenberg during this time include John Cage and Lou Harrison. Towards the end of his life, Schoenberg would develop a severe case of triskaidekaphobia, or the fear of the number 13. On his 65th birthday in 1939, composer and astrologist Daniel Rudyard prepared Schoenberg's horoscope, telling him the year was dangerous but not fatal. However, on his 76th birthday in 1950, another astrologist would tell Schoenberg that this year was extremely critical for him because, get this, 7 plus 6 equals 13. He even went so far as to alter the spelling of Aaron for Moses und Aaron, because the original spelling would make the title 13 letters long. Unfortunately, it seems as if his superstition got the last laugh. On July 13, 1951, Schoenberg died in his bed. His wife would write to his sister-in-law, quote, about 11:45, I looked at the clock and said to myself, another quarter of an hour and then the worst is over. Then the doctor called me. Arnold's throat rattled twice, His heart gave a powerful beat, and that was the end. To make things even worse for Schoenberg, July 13th, 1951 was a Friday. Schoenberg's style is typically divided into three parts, although these divisions are sometimes seen as arbitrary, as the music of each one is quite varied. Musicologist Ethan Heimel argues Schoenberg's 12-tone period, quote, representing a stylistically unified body of works is simply not supported by the musical evidence, and that his musical characteristics transcend divisional boundaries. Regardless, Schoenberg's first period is defined by late Romanticism, representative of Brahms and Wagner, although these two are considered polar opposites in the legacy of German music, and was aligned with Expressionism. Berg would say, quote, every smallest turn of phrase, even accompanimental figuration, is significant. He continues, saying, quote, everything is thematic. There is not a single note that does not have a thematic basis. Schoenberg's second period is defined by what's often referred to as free atonality, involving the abandonment of key centers as well as whole tones, chordal harmony, and unusual instrument pairings. Webern would say of this period, quote, it creates entirely new expressive values, therefore it also needs new means of expression. Content and form cannot be separated. Schoenberg's final period is defined by a sort of reworking of the 12-tone technique and a return to tonality. He sought to make his texture simpler and clearer, calling it a, quote, method of composing with 12 tones which are related only with one another. In this, all 12 pitches are considered equal. Interestingly, Schoenberg would compare his method to Einstein's discoveries in physics. In general, Schoenberg's works were, and to an extent still are, not well received. The only real exceptions being his Pelléas und Melisande and Göra Lieder. American composer Alan Shawn would say Schoenberg's work is usually defended rather than listened to, and it's difficult to experience it separate from the ideology surrounding it.
Do you love her?
Yes.
Are you willing to do whatever it takes to stay with her?
No.
One article in 2003 notes how Schoenberg's music is revered by experts but not well liked among the public, saying, quote, British attempts to popularize music of this kind can now safely be said to have failed. Heimel argues that a general understanding of Schoenberg's 12-tone music has been difficult to achieve because of its, quote, truly revolutionary nature. Additionally, misinformation was spread by early writers about its rules and exceptions which, quote, bear little relation to the most significant features of Schoenberg's music. Despite all of this criticism, Schoenberg still has his defenders. Musicologist Stephen Walsh would say, quote, Schoenberg may be the first great composer in modern history whose music has not entered the repertoire almost a century and a half after his birth. While serialism became a central and controversial issue among American and European musicians throughout the 20th century, some composers would take serialism and develop it in radical ways. Some of these people included Pierre Boulez, Caroline Stockhausen, Milton Babbitt, and Luigi Nono, who went on to marry one of Schoenberg's daughters. Additionally, many of Schoenberg's students became influential teachers at major American universities, including Leonard Stein, Leon Kirchner, and Patricia Carpenter. The Schoenberg estate was initially kept at the Arnold Schoenberg Institute at USC, but was later transferred to the Arnold Schoenberg Center in Vienna in 1998. Unfortunately, what was left of the estate in California was damaged by the wildfires in early 2025. Other interesting facts about Schoenberg include him having an asteroid named after him, and he was quite a good painter.